I was in the middle of fixing a leaky tap under the kitchen sink when my mobile rang. I'd been putting that job off for 3 weeks, so naturally, the moment I finally got under there with a wrench, the phone started buzzing on the bench above me. I pulled myself out, wiped my hands on an old tea towel, and looked at the screen. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail. Is this Douglas Whitmore? The voice was formal, measured. A woman. Speaking, I said. Mr. Whitmore, my name is Patricia Hearn. I'm a solicitor with Hearn and Associates in Christchurch. I'm calling regarding the estate of Mr. Colin Whitmore. I believe he was your second cousin? I leaned back against the kitchen bench. Colin. I hadn't spoken to the man in perhaps 12 years. We'd crossed paths at a funeral my uncle's. I think shaken hands. Said we'd catch up. And never did. That's how it goes sometimes. Yes, I said. I knew Colin. Has something happened? I'm sorry to inform you that Mr. Whitmore passed away 6 weeks ago. He had no spouse and no children. After considerable review of his estate documents, you have been named as his primary beneficiary. I didn't say anything for a moment. The tap was still dripping somewhere behind the cupboard door. Mr. Whitmore? Sorry, yes. I'm here. What does that mean exactly? His estate? There was a brief pause. The sound of papers. Mr. Whitmore owned a 340-acre sheep and cattle station outside of Fairleigh, in the Mackenzie Basin. He also held investment accounts and term deposits. The combined value of the estate, after legal fees and outstanding debts, comes to approximately $4.3 million. I set the wrench down on the bench very carefully, as though it might shatter. I'm sorry. Did you say 4 million? 4.3 million, yes. Mr. Whitmore, are you all right? I think so, I said. I'm not entirely sure. I was 64 years old, living in a 3-bedroom house in Timaru that I'd been slowly repairing for 11 years. Driving a ute with 280,000 kilometers on the clock, and surviving on my pension and the odd bit of contract fencing work when my back would allow it. $4.3 million was not a number that belonged in my life. Patricia Hearn told me she would send the documents through by courier, that there would be a meeting in Christchurch within the fortnight, that I shouldn't make any major decisions in the meantime. I thanked her. I hung up. Then I stood in my kitchen for a long time, watching the afternoon light move across the lino floor, and I thought about my life and how strange it was. I hadn't always been the man living quietly in Timaru, with a dripping tap and a 20-year-old ute. There'd been a time when I'd worked hard at a building company, built something reasonable for myself and my family. My wife Pauline had passed 11 years earlier cancer, quick and brutal, and after that things had changed. The business I'd been part owner of had dissolved during the rough years that followed. I'd moved south. I'd scaled back. My 2 children, my son Brendan, who was 41 and lived in Auckland, and my daughter Natalie, who was 38 and lived in Wellington, had their own lives, their own families, their own pressures. I understood that. I told myself I understood that. But there were phone calls that didn't come. There were Christmases that were quiet. There was a hospital stay 2 years ago, nothing serious. A procedure on my knee where I'd been collected from the ward by my neighbor, a retired school teacher named Graham, because I hadn't wanted to bother anyone. I'd told myself that was my choice. After Patricia Hearn's phone call, I sat with this news for 3 days before I told a single soul. I walked the station in my mind. I'd never been there, but I looked it up online. 340 acres in the Mackenzie Basin. Photographs of golden tussock running up toward the ranges. A modest homestead. Several outbuildings. Sheep dotted across the lower paddocks like scattered cotton. On the 3rd day, I rang my son. Dad. Brendan always answered with a slightly distracted tone, like I'd called during something important. What's up? I just wanted to catch up, I said. How are things? Yeah, busy. Lena's got the kids in swimming now, Tuesdays and Thursdays, so the evenings are a bit full on. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, but I said that I did. We talked for 11 minutes. I know because I checked the call timer afterward. The way you do when you're measuring something you'd rather not measure. He asked how my back was. I told him it was managing. He told me about a renovation they were planning on their kitchen. I listened. At no point did I mention the phone call from Patricia Hearn. At no point did he ask whether anything was happening in my life. We said goodbye warmly enough, and I put the phone down and sat with it. The next day I rang Natalie. She answered on the fourth ring, slightly breathless. Dad, hi. Hang on, sorry. I'm just Marcus. Put that down. It's not a toy, sorry, Dad. What's up? Nothing urgent, I said. Just calling to say hello. Oh. Yeah, good. How are you? Getting on, I said. Listen, I wanted to run something by you. I've had a bit of a difficult month with the cost of things. The rates went up, and the ute needed some work done. I was wondering whether, Dad. Her voice shifted. Not unkind, but firm in the way that people are when they've decided something in advance. We've talked about this. We're really stretched right now with the mortgage review and Marcus's school fees. I can't. I'm sorry. Maybe ring Brendan? I already spoke to Brendan, I said. There was a brief silence. Dad, you're on the pension. You get by. You've told me yourself you manage fine. I do manage, I said. So what's the money for, actually? It doesn't matter, I said. Forget I mentioned it. I heard her exhale. I'm not trying to be harsh. We just have our own situation to deal with. You understand? Of course, I said. I understand completely. I rang Brendan the following morning. I told him the same thing. A difficult month, the rates, the ute. I was vaguer this time, curious to see what he'd do with less to push against. Dad. I mean, what do you actually need? Like, a specific number? A few hundred would help, I said. Just to bridge the gap. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. A few hundred. Dad, I'm in the middle of a kitchen renovation. We're talking 60 grand just for the cabinetry. I don't have a few hundred to be moving around right now. $60,000 for cabinetry. I made a note of that. I get it, I said. Don't worry about it. Have you looked into any support services? There are things for people your age, aren't there? Through work and income. People your age. I was 64. Not 90. I told him. I'd look into it. I sat with all of this for another week. What I want to be clear about is that I didn't do what I did next out of bitterness. That might be hard to believe, but it's true. I'd spent 3 weeks since Patricia Hearn's phone call examining my situation from every angle. And what I kept returning to was a question I hadn't let myself ask clearly in years. Not whether my children loved me, I think they did. In the way people love things they've stopped paying much attention to, but whether they saw me. Whether I existed to them as a person or merely as an occasional obligation. The test I decided to run wasn't about catching them out. It was about knowing the truth. Before I tell you what happened next, I should mention my grandson, Liam. Liam is my son Brendan's eldest. He was 19 at the time of all this. He'd finished school the year before, taken a gap year, and was doing casual work at a dairy farm outside Palmerston North while he figured out what he wanted to study. He rang me every 2 or 3 weeks, always on a Sunday morning, always with something to say. He asked questions, proper ones, the kind where you could tell he was actually listening to the answer. He'd driven down to Timaru to visit me twice in the past year, a trip of roughly 6 hours each way, just to spend a weekend helping me clear out the old sleepout and go fishing off the wharf at Caroline Bay. He didn't know anything about the inheritance. I hadn't told anyone yet. About a month after the calls with Brendan and Natalie, I rang Liam on a Sunday morning. Grandad. What are you up to? Not much, I said. Just had breakfast. Bit of a rough few weeks, actually. Yeah? How come? The doctor wants me to get some blood work done. And depending on results, there might be some medication I'll need. Could be ongoing. Expensive stuff. There was a pause. Not the distracted, calculating pause I'd heard from his father. Just a pause. How much are we talking? Could be a few hundred a month, I said. I'm not sure yet. I'll manage. I always do, Granddad. He said it the way young people do when they want you to stop being stoic for a minute. Do you need help? Because I've got some put away. It's not heaps, but don't be silly, I said. You're saving for your future. You are my future, he said. You're my family. What's the point of having savings if my granddad's going without medication? I had to set the phone down for a moment. I picked it back up. I appreciate that more than you know, I said. Let me see what the doctor says first. Promise me you'll tell me if you need something. I promise. And Granddad, do you want me to come down? I can probably get a few days off next week. You don't need to do that. I know I don't need to. Do you want me to? 6 days later, Liam's old Corolla pulled into my driveway at 7:30 in the evening. He'd driven down after his shift finished, stopped once for petrol and a pie, and arrived with a bag of groceries he'd bought on the way through town because he thought I might not have much in. He stayed for 4 days. We fixed the leaky tap together. We drove out to the Mackenzie Basin. I told him I'd heard it was worth seeing, which was true in more ways than he knew. We stood on a gravel road and looked out over the tussock and the mountains, and I thought about Colin Whitmore, who I'd barely known, leaving me all of this. On the third evening, after dinner, I told Liam the truth. He sat very still while I explained it. The phone call from Patricia Hearn, the station, the 4.3 million, the calls to his father and his aunt, what they'd said, what they hadn't said. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. How long have you been sitting on this? About 6 weeks, I said. He nodded slowly. He didn't say anything dramatic. He didn't whoop or make a fuss about the money. He said, "Are you all right?" That's the thing about Liam. He cuts straight to what matters. I think so, I said. I needed to know. And now you do. And now I do. What are you going to do? I told him I'd been thinking carefully about that. I told him about the meeting in Christchurch with Patricia Hearn, which I'd rescheduled twice already. I told him I was thinking about keeping the station, maybe getting someone in to manage the day-to-day while I found my feet. I told him I'd been thinking about the future, really thinking about it in a way I hadn't allowed myself to in a long time. And Brendan? And Natalie? He asked. I'll tell them, I said. But not yet. 2 weeks later, I drove up to Wellington. I hadn't told Natalie I was coming. I'd said only that I had something to discuss in person. She seemed mildly inconvenienced by this, and scheduled me in for a Saturday morning while Marcus was at football. I sat at her kitchen table. It was a nice kitchen. Open plan. Stone benchtop. One of those coffee machines that costs as much as a second-hand car. Dad, she said, setting a flat white in front of me, you're being very mysterious. Am I? I said. Is this about money? Because I told you. We really can't. It's not about money, I said. Not in the way you mean. I explained the situation clearly and without drama. The cousin, the solicitor, the station, the amount. I watched her face. She went very still. 4 million, she said. 4.3. She looked at her coffee. Then back at me. Then at her coffee again. Dad, that's incredible. You must be thrilled. I'm coming to terms with it, I said. You know, I was thinking with the mortgage review coming up, we've been really stressed about the interest rate situation. And if there was any way you could Natalie, I said. She stopped. When I rang you 6 weeks ago, and told you I was having trouble covering my rates and getting the ute sorted. You told me you were stretched and couldn't help." She blinked. "Well, yes, but that was the truth," I said. "And I appreciate you being honest. But I want you to sit for a moment with the fact that your answer changed when you found out about the money, because I need you to understand that I noticed." The color came up in her cheeks. She started to say something about how it wasn't that simple, about how she still cared, about context. I let her finish. I didn't argue. I took the ferry to Auckland the following week and had the same conversation with Brendan. He handled it differently, more blustering, more defensive. He said I was being unfair. He said plenty of people went to work and income. He said he hadn't known the full picture. "That's right," I said. "You didn't. And what you chose to do with the partial picture tells me something." "Come on, Dad. That's not fair." "Maybe not," I said. "But it's honest. What I did with Colin Whitmore's estate is this. I took on the station. I drove out to Fairlie with Liam, and we walked the property for 2 full days, through the paddocks, up to the high country, along the creek lines. It smelled like dry grass and cold air, and something I could only describe as space. I think I might have cried a little, up near the top gate, with the Mackenzie Basin spread below me and no one close enough to see. I appointed a station manager, a competent woman in her 40s named Robin who'd grown up in the district and knew the country like her own hands. I moved a portion of the investment funds into a managed portfolio. I had a new will drawn up with Patricia Hearn. In that will, I left the station and the majority of the estate to Liam. Not because I'd written Brendan and Natalie off entirely, I left each of them something modest, enough to be fair without being a reward for absence. But the station, the heart of it, the thing that had fallen to me by chance and grace from a cousin I'd barely known, I wanted it to go to someone who would understand what it meant. I told each of them what was in the will. That felt important. I didn't want Liam to face it alone after I was gone, and I didn't want there to be surprises used as weapons. Natalie cried. She said I was punishing her. I told her I wasn't, that punishment looks backward, and what I was doing was looking forward. I was putting what I had into the hands most likely to hold it well. Brendan said I'd always favored Brendan's own son over his kids, which was a strange sort of argument, since Liam was his son. I think he meant I'd favored Liam over the idea of Brendan himself. Maybe that was true. I couldn't find it in myself to apologize for it. Liam, when I told him, sat in silence for a long time. "Grandad, I don't need all of that. The station, I know you don't need it," I said. "That's part of why you're getting it." I settled into a routine that surprised me with its contentment. I split my time between Timaru and the station, spending long weekends out at Fairlie, learning the rhythms of the place, getting to know Robin and the 2 young musterers who worked the high country runs. I bought a decent ute. I got the kitchen sorted, not $60,000 worth, but a good, honest renovation that meant the bench didn't slope anymore. I am 65 now. My back gives me trouble. My knee, the one that was operated on 2 years ago when I collected myself from the ward with Graham's help, is better than it was. I sleep well in the station homestead when I'm out there. The silence is the kind that fills you up rather than hollowing you out. I see Brendan and Natalie at Christmas. We are civil, and in our better moments we are warm. Natalie has softened somewhat over the past year. She rings more often than she used to, and I believe she means it now in a way she perhaps didn't before. With Brendan, it is harder. There is a wound there that scabbed over quickly but sits close to the surface. We manage it politely. Liam came out to the station for the first muster he was able to take time off for. I watched him stand on the ridge above the lower paddocks in the early morning light, hands in his pockets, looking out over the Canterbury Plains. He looked like he belonged there. He looked like someone at the beginning of something. The things I've learned from all of this are not complicated, though they were expensive to discover. What people do when the stakes are low tells you more about them than anything they do when the stakes are high. Anyone can show up for abundance. The question is, who shows up for ordinary Tuesday struggles, for the dripping tap, the tight month, the long drive for no particular reason except that someone needed company? There is a difference between love that is declared and love that is demonstrated. And when the two come apart, it is the demonstrated kind that tells the truth. Do not wait until the end of your life to take inventory of who is actually in it. Do the count now. While there is still time to act on what you find, we tell ourselves we don't want to be a burden. But what we often mean is that we are afraid of the answer we'll get if we ask for help. If you are afraid of the answer, ask the question anyway. It is better to know. Wealth without wisdom is a fast way to find out how many friends you don't actually have. But poverty, or the appearance of poverty, is a very efficient way to find out who you do have. The most valuable thing Colin Whitmore left me wasn't the station or the investment accounts. It was the accidental clarity that came with them. The circumstances forced me to look squarely at the shape of my life. Who was in it? How they were in it? What that meant. Not everyone gets that kind of mirror held up to them while they're still standing. I try to remember that. On the mornings when I'm out at the station and the frost is on the tussock, and Robin's heading out early to check the water troughs, and the ute starts on the first turn, I try to remember that this is what it looks like when things have gone roughly right. My name is Douglas Whitmore. I am 65 years old. I live between a house in Timaru and a sheep station in the Mackenzie Basin. My grandson rings me on Sunday mornings, and he always has something to say. That is enough. That is more than enough.